Ktuned is known for making quality parts, and the rear camber kit is no exception. Now this specific camber kit fits EFs, EGs, EKs, so that's 88 through 2000 Honda Civics, as well as DAs and DC2s, which is 90 through 2001 Acura Integras. I'm installing the rear camber kit on my 91 CRX because I plan on lowering the car, and whenever you lower a car, it throws off the suspension geometry, so we need a way to adjust the rear camber to bring everything back into specification. And that's where the Ktuned rear camber kit really comes into play, because it's going to give us that adjustability. Now there's two bushings that are attached to the arm itself. One goes to the body of the car and the other goes to the rear trailing arm. Those bushings are also going to get replaced when you replace this arm, so it's kind of like a no-brainer because it's giving you brand new bushings, which is always beneficial for your suspension, as well as the ability to adjust the rear camber. To me, it's a win-win. You may have noticed that after I lifted up my car, I put jack stands underneath it. Always use jack stands, do not rely on a floor jack because it just isn't safe. It could fail at any moment. Now that the car is secure and safe to work on, you can see that getting to the rear camber arm is actually pretty easy. It has one bolt going in through the trailing arm and these two bolts right here going into the body of the car, and that easy the part comes off and we could grab our brand new Ktuned part and get it ready for installation. One thing I like to do is grab painter's tape and wrap it around the section of where you would put a wrench on this thing. You may have noticed that the part is powder coated, and it would really suck to scratch up that surface or even damage it to the point where it causes corrosion in the future, and nobody wants that. So not only is the tape on there to protect the part from myself scratching it, but also once the car goes in for wheel alignment, because it is going to need a proper professional wheel alignment after this, if the technician sees that there's blue tape on here, it may tell him, hey, this guy really cares about his car, and it might prevent him from just going at your car with a set of pliers and damaging that nice powder coat. If you're having difficulty lining up the bolt hole, all you have to do is extend the arm and it'll bring it that much closer to the trailing arm and make it a little bit easier to install that bolt. Once the bolt is in place, you can go ahead and tighten up the arm again and try to get the camber back to wherever you had it before. And of course, you want to make sure you always tighten down the bolts to the proper torque spec so that you don't damage anything or any of the bolts don't back themselves out. Before we tighten down that last bolt, I'm going to go ahead and raise this side of the suspension to try to simulate the car being on the ground. And it's just a good practice whenever you're tightening down bolts that are going through bushings, because you can cause premature wear on the bushings if you tighten them down when the suspension is in a unloaded state. I'm just going to go ahead and tighten this down and lock it down in place. I did not make any measurements, but you can if you want. You could actually grab your old arm and set it next to the new one and try to get it as close as possible. The reason why I'm not measuring mine is because I'm not going to be driving the car much, and as soon as I'm done with this, the car is going to go in for a proper wheel alignment, so I'm not worried about if the alignment is way off at this point. Next up, we have the Ktuned front camber kit. Now these are specific to the EF, but you can also get them for the EG, EK, DA, as well as DC2. And just like the rear camber kit, the parts look great. The powder coating came out perfect. The welds look nice. When you hold them in your hand, they have a nice weight to them. Everything just looks solid. I think one of my favorite features is that you could actually get replacement parts from Ktuned, whether it's the bushings or the ball joints themselves. So when they go bad, you're not forced to buy another set or another set of control arms. You could just replace the bushings or the ball joints, which I think is absolutely fantastic. Now sometimes the cotter pin that's on this ball joint can be rusted in place. At that point, if you have an impact gun, just run off the nut and it'll eat right through it. If not, just use a regular ratchet and again you could just eat right through it. It doesn't really matter because you're going to be replacing that ball joint anyway with the new camber kit. Usually with a hammer, if you hit the knuckle, it should or usually break the ball joint free. If it doesn't, like in my case here, just use a proper tool and you can see how easily it removes the ball joint. I'm just going to remove any nuts and bolts that I have to in order to lower the strut assembly, and it's going to give me that little bit of extra clearance that I need to remove the upper control arm. Now you may have noticed that in some shots I have old suspension, and then in the next shot I may have brand new suspension. And that's because while I'm recording this video for the ktuned camber kits, I'm also recording a separate video on changing the suspension on my CRX. So if you're interested in seeing that video, I'm going to put a card in the top right hand corner right here. Now that I've lowered the strut and removed the upper control arm, you can see it gives me just enough clearance to remove the upper control arm, and we can just slide it out of here, and we're going to do the same exact thing for installing the new part. Here I am assembling the camber kit, and it goes together pretty easy. You're going to notice that I'm putting the bolts in from the inside facing out, and that ended up causing some clearance issues with me, so I ended up switching it around. So I put the bolts in from the outside going in, if that makes any sense. So basically the nuts are going to be on the inside, and I have one nut that doesn't match, and that's because I opened up this package maybe 2 months ago and I seem to have misplaced one of the nuts. It's the only reason why I'm using a different nut, but if you get your kit, of course it's going to include all of the hardware that you need. Now that the camber kit is in place, I could reinstall the strut assembly. I put a small rubber hose on the ball joint so that it doesn't scratch up my new strut or spring while I'm trying to install it. Yes, I know, I'm that type of person. I should have done this before I put the camber kit on the car, but I forgot about it. Now I don't want to set the camber to extreme negative or positive. I want it somewhere in the center. So all I'm doing here is loosening the 6 screws and hitting it with a rubber mallet to not damage anything. And once I got it in the center, I'm just gonna go ahead and tighten everything down. Like I said, it's way easier to do before you actually put the part on the car, but it slipped my mind. The reason why I did that weird overlap thing is because my original footage was overexposed and it just looked pretty bad, so I'm trying to be creative here. And the same thing for this footage, it was way overexposed, so I decided to not use it. And in fact, I'm just showing you the footage of when I was taking these things apart, and I'm just playing that footage in reverse. I hope that makes sense. And just like everything else, I'm going to follow the torque specs when putting everything back together. Here I'm using my floor jack underneath the lower control arm, and I'm loading the suspension before I tighten any of the bolts down. Again, just like I mentioned in the rear of the car, you want to tighten everything while it's loaded to simulate the car being on the ground and to not wear out any bushings or ball joints prematurely. And I'm pretty much done with the camber kit all the way around. I've done the complete rear set and the complete front set. So I'm just gonna go ahead and torque the lug nuts down to 80 foot-pounds for the CRX and take the car in for a proper wheel alignment. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, and like always, thanks for watching.